Each November, the Legislative Analyst Office issues its California Fiscal Outlook. This document provides our updated economic, revenue, and expenditure projections, assuming current state policies, both regards to spending and revenues. This report is intended to help give the legislature a sense of its fiscal situation heading into the 2016-17 fiscal year, which starts next July 1, but also to give it a sense of those fiscal trends and how they extend for the next 3 fiscal years. Based on our review, we find that the state's near-term fiscal health is much brighter than when the budget was adopted this past June. One key indicator of the state's fiscal health is the level of total reserves. Let's first take a look at those reserve levels for the 2015-16 fiscal year. When the budget was adopted in June, it assumed that the state would end the 15-16 fiscal year with $4.6 billion in total reserves. Our update now indicates that there will be an increase in those reserve levels of $3.3 billion. This is due almost exclusively to our estimate of revenues in the current year, which we believe will be about $3.5 billion higher than what was assumed in the budget. In addition, we assume that the legislature makes no additional commitments in the current year. As a result, we would end the 15-16 fiscal year with $7.9 billion in reserves, equal to about 7% of total revenues. Let's now turn to the 2016-17 fiscal year. We start with that same $7.9 billion in reserves. We then estimate what would happen over the year, again, assuming no new commitments by the legislature. We estimate that because revenues are growing slightly faster than spending, that we would add $3.7 billion to reserves during the year. That would result in a total of $11.5 billion by the end of the 2016-17 fiscal year. In our report, we also projected fiscal trends through 2019-20. Now, estimating that far in the future is extremely difficult. Consequently, we offer different economic scenarios to show how the results can differ significantly. Let's first start with our main economic scenario. So under this economic scenario, we assume continued moderate growth over the entire outlook period, similar to what we've experienced in recent years. As you can see from the chart, the state would realize operating surpluses, that is, revenue coming in during the year compared with expenditures in that year, of about $5 billion. Absent any new commitments, this means that the legislature would build its reserves to even higher levels. Now, the chart also suggests that the state could afford some new commitments, whether spending increases or revenue reductions, and still build its reserves. It's important to note that the current expansion is already one of the longest in the post-World War II period. As a result, we wanted to show the fiscal trends if we assumed an alternative economic scenario. Under our recession scenario, we assumed that things head south at the start of 2017 and that we experience a recession that approaches the severity of the dot-com bust at the turn of the century. As the chart shows, those operating surpluses turn to operating deficits by 2017-18, and reserves run out by the end of the outlook period. If the state were to make additional commitments in 16-17, the reserves would run out 1 year earlier, and the state would face even greater operating deficits. The state is currently enjoying its most favorable financial situation in quite a long time. With any budget, however, there are risks. We just described the most important one that has to do with how the economy is doing. Given the state's very volatile revenue structure, any sort of economic downturn, and the state can lose billions of dollars in a very short period of time. There are also expenditure-related risks. The state's pension boards may make decisions that could add significant amounts of spending in our out years. Despite this overall positive situation, the legislature, in crafting its 2016-17 budget, will have this fundamental trade-off on whether it wants to make additional commitments now versus holding the line on such commitments and therefore reducing the risk of having to make difficult decisions later on.